Hey there. The war in Ukraine can feel, well, just overwhelming, right? It's this huge, complicated story, but sometimes you can see things a lot clearer if you just look at a tiny snapshot. So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to zoom in on just one 24-hour period to really understand the different fronts of this conflict.
So here's the question. What can a single day really tell us? We're going to unpack three events that seem completely disconnected: a high-level diplomatic summit, a really brutal overnight military strike, and a sharp political spat. And by the end, you're going to see how all these threads actually weave together to give us a much clearer picture of what this war looks like day in and day out. All right, let's get into it.
So, our story actually starts not on the battlefield, but in the world of international diplomacy. We're at an EU summit in Cyprus, where leaders were making some massive decisions, with huge financial and political implications.
Let's just start with a number that's pretty hard to wrap your head around. 78 billion pounds. That's the sterling equivalent of the 90 billion euro loan that EU leaders formally signed off on for Ukraine. And this isn't just a symbolic pat on the back. This is a massive financial lifeline.
So what's the big deal here? Well, this loan is designed to cover 2/3 of Kyiv's entire financial needs for the next 2 years. And, get this, it was only approved because Hungary and Slovakia, who had been holding out, finally dropped their vetoes. So with President Zelenskyy there in person, and with new sanctions passed against Russia, the message was pretty clear: a powerful, united front of European support.
But while all of that was happening, the handshakes, the agreements in Cyprus, the reality of the war itself was a world away, continuing with just relentless brutality. Let's shift over and see what was happening at that exact same time.
Okay, so now let's zoom right into the military front. Because while leaders were talking finance, the air was literally filled with drones and missiles, and the conflict was taking its devastating human toll.
So the fighting overnight, it really went two ways. On one side, you had Ukraine claiming a pretty successful, high-precision drone strike that they say killed a dozen Russian FSB officers in occupied Donetsk. But on the other side, Russia unleashed this massive aerial assault across Ukraine, launching over 100 drones and 2 ballistic missiles.
96. Just think about that number for a second. That's how many of those Russian drones Ukrainian air defenses managed to intercept and shoot down. I mean, it's a real testament to their defense capabilities, but wow, it also paints a stark picture of the sheer scale of the attack they were up against.
To really understand the human cost of all this, we have to look at one city in particular, the southern port of Odessa. It really bore the brunt of the attack. And this is where the numbers of drones and missiles, they become terrifyingly real.
And this is the reality behind the statistics. The head of the local military administration reported this heartbreaking detail. A married couple, both 75 years old, were killed. 15 other people were injured as these strikes destroyed homes and started fires. This is the brutal daily truth of the war on the ground.
Okay, let's zoom back out again. This time to the world of international politics, where the war has become this constant and often contentious subject, thousands of miles away from the front lines.
So here's how this political back and forth got started. On Thursday, Prince Harry makes a surprise visit to Kyiv, and at a security forum, he called on the United States to uphold its international obligations for global security. Then, the very next day, former U.S. President Donald Trump was asked to respond.
Now, Prince Harry was really specific about how he wanted his comments to be seen. He was trying to position himself not as a political figure, but as a humanitarian and a former soldier, someone appealing to a sense of duty and service on the world stage.
And Donald Trump's response? Well, it was a totally different vibe. It was sharp, personal, and really dismissive. Instead of talking about the substance of what Harry said, he just turned it into a personal job, questioning if he even had the authority to speak on it. It's a perfect example of how the war in Ukraine gets pulled into all sorts of other political feuds.
So, a summit, a strike, and a spat. What happens when we put these three really different events side by side? Well, we start to get a much clearer, more complete picture of what this war is actually about.
Right, this table really pulls it all together. On the diplomatic front, you see the strong, unified international support for Ukraine, symbolized by that massive loan. At the very same time, the military front shows the relentless, brutal violence that is just continuing every single day. And then, finally, the political front reveals that the war is a constant talking point in global politics, often becoming a tool in other disputes. The key takeaway is that all three of these things are true at once.
And that really leaves us with this one big, kind of tough question. When a single day brings a huge diplomatic win, and at the same time, devastating human loss, what does progress in this war even look like? It's a really complex and sobering thought, and it's the reality that defines this conflict, one day at a time.